I invite you to hear these words from Psalm 40. Hopefully this informs what we've just been doing and what I'm encouraging you to do. I waited patiently for the Creator, who inclined to me and heard my cry. The Creator drew me up from the desolate pit, out of the miry bog, and set my feet upon a rock, making my steps secure. The Holy One put a new song in my mouth, a song of praise to our Maker. Many will see and be in awe and put their trust in the Creator. Happy are those who make the Creator their trust, who do not turn to the proud, to those who go astray after false gods. You have multiplied, O Creator, your wondrous deeds and your thoughts towards us. None can compare with you. Were I to proclaim and tell of them, they would be more than could be counted. May it be so for us today. So with a whole week off comes a whole different gospel reading. So before I left, I was going to preach on Luke 24, but then I got really excited about John 11. So you get John 11 this week. John 11, 1 through 6, and then 17 through 26. So I invite you to listen. And this might sound odd to you that I choose this, but I have a cool sermon today, so bear with me. And I'm biased, I get it, but I'm super excited. Now, a certain man was ill, Lazarus of Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. Mary was one who anointed the Lord with her perfume and wiped his feet with her hair. Her brother Lazarus was ill. So the sisters sent a message to Jesus, "Lord, the one who you love is ill." But when Jesus heard it, he said, "This illness does not lead to death. Rather, it is for God's glory, so that the Son of God may be glorified through it." Accordingly, though Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus, after having heard that Lazarus was ill, he stayed 2 days longer in the place where he was. When Jesus departs, he goes. When Jesus arrived, he found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb 4 days. Now Bethany was near Jerusalem, some 2 miles away, and many of the Jews had come to Martha and Mary to console them about their brother. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went and met him, while Mary stayed at home. Martha said to Jesus, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But even now, I know that God will give you whatever you ask." Jesus said to her, "Your brother will rise again." Martha said to him, "I know that he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day." Jesus said to her, "I am the resurrection and the life. Those who believe in me, even though they die, will live. And everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this?" Martha said to him, "Yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, the one coming into the world." May God add the blessing to the reading today. So in my search for something new, I have come upon a gem for you. Absolute gem. As we wrestle with what it means to be resurrected, as we wrestle with and wonder about what is new life all about, I have something new for you. I'm going to draw heavily today from new research. Some of you know Diana Butler Bass, and she presented a sermon that I read that absolutely blew my mind and got me going down a whole new path of thinking. So I'm going to share that with you today. Now, some of you, this story that I just read will seem a little familiar. Some of you know the story, right? You've heard this story before, of course. Okay. There's also a story kind of similar to it in Luke, the Gospel of Luke, chapter 10, where some of us will remember the story of Mary and Martha. And remember, Martha is busy. She's running around doing all this stuff, and Mary's the contemplative one that contemplatives like me always highlight, say she sat at Jesus' feet. and Jesus commended her for it. We have two stories. And often in our minds, we blend them, we blur them. And actually, there are commentaries on Luke's gospel. And those commentaries often begin with this saying, this is a story of Mary and Martha, the sisters of Lazarus, Mary and Martha of Bethany. That's what they say about Luke. But one of the problems with that is that if you actually look, you will see that the words in Bethany never appear in Luke's text. That should make us go, interesting, right? Indeed, if you look at a map, and I'd love to talk to Susan and Gary about this, but if you look at a map, Bethany is actually a village in the opposite direction of which Jesus was traveling in that section of the Gospel of Luke. Crazy. So many of us just conflate Luke 10 and John 11, which I just read, because there are two sisters named Mary and Martha. And they have this brother named Lazarus, and so they do indeed, in John, live in a place called Bethany. But this is the new research. These are two different families. These are two different stories. And you all know how adamant I am about keeping biblical narratives, gospel narratives, separate. Ooh, I see some of you reaching for Bibles already. I love it. Well done. So the intriguing question becomes, in this passage that I just read, who is this Mary? Who are we talking about? Because John 11 opens with that simple sentence, now a certain man was ill, Lazarus of Bethany. The village of Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. Now here's where it gets complex, but it's super fun, okay? Miss Butler Bass has a friend named Elizabeth Schrader, who was doing research. She learned the original languages of Aramaic, and so was learning, she learned how to read it in the original language, and she came across this manuscript called Papyrus 66. Look it up. Look it up, do your own web search, Papyrus 66, which is the oldest and most complete text we have of the Gospel of John. It's dated around the year 200 CE, really old, right? We've had it for a while, but for many years you had to go somewhere to see it. It's now been digitized. It's on the internet. It's cool. And Miss Schrader was doing this reading and research of it, and she read in this original text, now a certain man was ill, Lazarus of Bethany, the village of Mary, and his sister Mary. And she thought, what the heck did I just read? Some of you are going, what the heck did you just say? My Bible says now a certain man was ill, Lazarus of Bethany, the village of Mary, and her sister Martha. But the Greek text, the oldest Greek text in the world, doesn't say that. The oldest Greek text in the world says, now a certain man was ill, Lazarus of Bethany, at the village of Mary, and his sister Mary. Fascinating. Two Marys in the same verse. And so Ms. Schrader started doing some digging because she was like, what in the world is going on here? I don't get this. What she found was that in Greek, Mary is spelled M-A-R-I-A, like Maria. Okay? And somebody had gone, and you can see scribble marks, and replaced the I with the theta, which is TH. Instead of Mary, she made it he, it was certainly a he, made it Martha. Fascinating. They had gone back, and not only had they changed the second Mary to Martha, but that person had also changed the way it came out in English to the village of Mary. That would have stayed her sister Martha. Someone had changed the his to the her, even. From Lazarus' sister to Mary's sister Martha. So again, Ms. Schrader sat in the library and realized that Mary had become Mary and Martha. She went through the whole manuscript of John 11. I encourage you to do this. Read through John 11 and John 12. She went through and found that the editor had gone into every single place and changed every moment that you read Martha in English. It originally had said Mary. The editor changed it all. Every pronoun was changed. Every singular sister was changed to the plural sisters. And Ms. Schrader also conclusively proved that in Papyrus 66, this fiddling around with the text had indeed occurred. And so there are these old dudes in Germany who are in charge of translation and keeping the sacred text the sacred text. Even now, they are now wrestling with what should they do with this? Should they go back and rewrite it? Or should they put a little note at the bottom of all the pages in John 11 and 12 telling what they have found now? Old white guys in Germany are actually concerned about this. It's amazing. Absolutely amazing. Now, others have tracked this down. New Testament scholars, church historians. Tertullian, one of the ancient church fathers, actually wrote a bit of commentary on this. He wrote, around 200, commenting on this chapter, he said, Mary confessing him, Jesus, to be the Son of God. Mary confessed, not Martha, Mary. Martha said to Jesus in our Bibles, Tertullian said it was Mary, said, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died, but even now I know that God will give you whatever you ask. And we have in our Bible, and Jesus said to Martha, when it should have been Jesus said to Mary, your brother will rise again. And Martha said to him, I know that he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day. Jesus says to her, we heard this, I am the resurrection and the life. And then one of the most central lines in the whole Gospel of John, it's a Christological statement of who Jesus is. Jesus says, those who believe in me, even though they die, will live, and everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this? And Jesus asked this woman. And in the text of our Bible, Martha replies, Martha says, yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Messiah, the one who is to come into the world. One of only two Christological statements in all the Gospels. And Tertullian, the historian, said that this was Mary. And this new research says that this should be Mary. There was no Martha in that passage, according to Tertullian. Do you think that Tertullian's copy of John only had Mary? Fascinating. And what about how that passage begins with a story that I read to you, and why I read it to you, about how Martha runs out to meet Jesus, but Mary is so upset that poor Mary stays home because she can't possibly face Jesus. Let me answer that one. Egeria, a 4th century pilgrim to the Holy Land, writes in her diary, which is one of the most important diaries that we have from the ancient world, from any ancient Christian, about her pilgrimage group getting to the church in the place where, guess who? Mary, not Martha, the sister of Lazarus, ran out to meet Jesus. That Mary ran out to meet Jesus. Tertullian doesn't mention Martha. In Egeria's diary, there is no mention of a Martha. Indeed, in these ancient sources, the story is a story about Mary. John 11 is about Lazarus and one woman, one sister, Mary. Now, that may raise a very provocative question. What the heck's going on here? And why would somebody do this? I might have an answer to that. Let's think about that John 11 passage that I read to you. Like I was saying, it's one of two Christological confessions in all the Gospels. Anybody remember the first one? Who makes it? Jesus says, who do you say that I am? And Peter. Excellent. Peter says, you are the Messiah, the Son of the living God. And Jesus turns around and says to him, you are Peter, upon this rock I will build my church. And Rome is built, and the Vatican is built, and trace the line of Peter all the way back. right? We're clear on that part? The other Christological confession is here in the Gospel of John. And until this point, it has belonged to a minor character named Martha, who no one ever really knew who it was. And Jesus answers her, she answers him, and pretty much exactly the words that Peter had uttered in the Synoptic Gospels. Very, very similar. And then what happens to Martha? She disappears from history. Gone. Unimportant, unremembered. And who is this? Right? But here's where the plot thickens. What if it's Mary? The Mary who shows up in John 11 is not an unremembered Mary. This Mary has long been suspected to be that other Mary, Mary Magdalene. Think of that. Is it really true that the other Christological confession of the New Testament comes from the voice of Mary Magdalene? How fascinating would that be? That the Gospel of John gives a central statement in the entirety of the New Testament, not to a man, but to a woman, and to a really important woman, who will show up later in John as the first witness to the resurrection. You see how these two stories work together. In John 11, Lazarus is raised from the dead, and who is there but Mary Magdalene? And at the resurrection, she confessed that Jesus was indeed the Son of God. And then you go to chapter 20, only 9 chapters later, and who is the person going to the tomb? Who's there? Mary Magdalene. She mistakes Jesus at first for the gardener, but she turns around and says, Mary, and he says, Lord, and it's Mary Magdalene. Here's another interesting piece. You might say to yourself, I thought she was from Magdala, not Bethany. That's why we call her Mary Magdalene, right? What is this Bethany place? There's an important debate going on right now about where Mary Magdalene actually was from. A lot of people, especially if you've ever been to the Holy Land, and I'd love to ask Susan and Gary this, you might have gone to that little village that's right on the Sea of Galilee. And there's a church there, the Church of Mary Magdalene. I think Susan has shown us pictures of this. And some very nice tourist guide has often said to people, this is the place that Mary Magdalene was from. But there's a really weird problem with that. That village wasn't known as Magdala in the first century. Interesting. And nobody's quite sure where that village would be if there really was a village called Magdala. But instead of Mary being from this nice fishing village, there's good evidence that she was from somewhere else. And this text in John 11 starts convincing us that maybe she was from Bethany, right? But then what about Magdala? Where does that come from? What if instead of the place she comes from, what if that's part of her title? Do you know what Magdala means in Aramaic? Magdala means the tower. Magdala means the tower. So in the Synoptics, Jesus and Peter have a discussion. Peter utters the Christological confession. And as a result of that confession, Jesus says, you are Peter, the rock. And on you I will build my church. In the Gospel of John, Mary and Jesus have a conversation, and Mary utters the Christological confession. What if we knew it to be she becomes Mary the tower at that point? So then we have Peter the rock, and we have Mary the tower. Think how beautiful that is. Think how different that is. What if that story was not hidden from our view for 2,000 years? First, what would Rome have done with it? Split personality. But what if women were included in equality with men through time? Peter the rock, great. Mary the tower, yes. What would that church look like? What would a faith built on Mary the tower look like? Be like? What if we joined with Mary the witness, Mary the tower, Mary the one who proclaims the resurrection, who knows it, who speaks it? This is not a Dan Brown novel. For some of you who follow Dan Brown and see his movies or read his novels, it's not a conspiracy theory. This is some of the best, most cutting-edge historical research in the world. And we are living in a moment of radical transformation in the understanding of the Gospels. We in this church know a lot about Quadratos and that kind of elevated understanding, I would call elevated understanding of the four Gospels, where they've come from, what they mean. What if this story of Mary hadn't been hidden? What if Mary in John 11 hadn't been split into two women? What if we'd known about Mary the tower all along? What if that guy who went back and made the changes never had done so? What kind of Christianity would we have if the faith hadn't only been based upon Peter, you are the rock, and upon this rock I'll build my church, but what if we'd always known, Mary, you are the tower, and by this tower we shall all stand? What would our faith be like? What would the stories be like? So if you're looking for something new, here you go. Here's something new. What will you do with it? This may change your view of Scripture. This may change your understanding of faith or the church or God. Good. Good. Let it be shaken. Let it be changed. Pray with that tower. Pray with yourself as a tower. What would that be like for you? Who are you through that model? What is the new life that this breaks open in you? What is this giving birth to in you? So I guess part of my prayer is that our minds would be blown together. And may a new thing emerge right in our midst. May we see it. Amen.